So my mom's kept freaking on me, you know. They kept on trying to push me into all this stuff, like soccer, swimming, get involved with the community center, you know. Like, it was just most of it was a joke. I kind of liked the martial arts that they got me into, but, you know, they had so many rules. They were like, do it this way and do it that way. And, you know, it just, most of the time I ended up fighting with the other kids, sitting by myself, or I would just leave, you know. So, you know, I kept on having to meet, like, with my workers and, you know, I'd do my bloody chores around the house all the time. And, but I just felt that they were just going to eventually dump me with the children's aid. You know, I could just feel it coming. And at that point, I was kind of like, you know, like, screw these people. I know some people that will hang out with me just fine.
Cody's behaviors continued to escalate through grade 9. And he began to push back and to act out in ways that resulted in him being suspended from school. But he also began to stay out with his friends on the streets, to not return overnights, which was a new development that Janice and Ellie were very worried about, secretive about where he went. And there was also a concern that things were starting to go missing in the house. So he started taking money from her purse. She was starting to lose money on a more consistent basis.
So it was cool, man. You know, like, sometimes one of us would steal some money from home, maybe me, maybe one of my friends, and we'd go buy some cheap beer or something, or score some weed, and, you know, we would just hang out and it would be all good, and, you know, we'd be together and there would be no hassles with it. The thing about drinking and smoking is you don't have to try so hard. Everything feels like it's going to work out, you know. There was no hassle, there was no working, no one telling you how to do it properly, you know. It was just us having a good time and no worries. And, you know, we get into some stuff, you know, we do some graffiti around town and bust some stuff up around town, but, you know, never really got hassled by the cops, we never got caught for anything, and we were always doing it together.
The concerns became greater and greater, and Janice and Ellie contacted us because they were very afraid that they could no longer keep him safe, and that there was no amount of disciplining or consequences or grounding that he would respond to in a productive way. He might have been compliant, but he would then re-engage in his high-risk behavior. And additionally, the conflicts, the parent-child conflict in the house was really being elevated, and the issue around simple routines and tasks and responsibilities were becoming real minefields for lots of conflict and lots of aggressive behavior on his part. And so parents contacted us, and we looked at bringing him into care on a temporary ward agreement, because we knew that they were doing the very best that they could. And we also knew that they were very involved in his care, that they wanted the very best for their son, even though the parent-child conflict was so high.
And then, like I said before, my mom's called CAS on me. And then, boom, you know, I'm a CAS kid again. Back to where I started. Started with nothing, now I'm back to nothing. And, you know, I felt like I just didn't have anything or anyone except my crew. I knew I could trust them, you know. I knew they weren't going to call the cops on me. I knew they weren't going to call CAS on me. And I knew they would be down for doing whatever I wanted to do.
So when Cody entered Acorn House, he didn't honeymoon like a lot of other young people do when they first come into residential care. He chose to spend a lot of time in his room away from the other kids. He really set himself apart from the other kids. He wasn't trying to establish relationships with the staff, but he did do everything that he needed to do in terms of meeting the expectations so that he could very quickly move from kind of the first phase of coming into the program to the second phase with additional privileges, including lots of community time and more unsupervised time. It didn't take long for the staff and his parents to realize that this was not a good idea for him and that his plan of care, his initial admission plan, needed to be altered to reflect increased time in the house and to start more carefully supervising his activities outside of the program. He continued to push around rules, and predictably, as the behaviors he was exhibiting at home around missing curfew and self-medicating, those were behaviors that fairly quickly reestablished themselves in Acorn House.
So here I am at a group home, and it's called Acorn House. What a great name for a nut house, right? This place is strict. I have meetings with my moms all the time. I got workers coming at me from every direction. It's like prison guards are everywhere, you know? There's so much expectations for me here. There's so much they want me to do, and I just can't handle it a lot of the time. There's so much they want from me, and I just want to, I got to get out and see my crew, you know what I mean? I just want to hang out with them, drink a little, smoke a little, and just forget about all this crap I have coming down on me from this place.
He returned to the home under the influence of, we think, alcohol. This resulted in a real disruption in the house, and when he was confronted by the staff, he kind of stormed off to his room and woke up his roommate, who wanted to know what was going on, and the situation escalated very, very quickly, resulting in his damaging his roommate's property to the point where he actually picked up a broken piece of a CD and threatened his roommate, threatened to hurt his roommate. And this was behavior that we hadn't seen before, and Janice and Ellie were not familiar with that degree of aggression. So it was very concerning that he would be disinhibited enough through his self-medicating that he would actually behave in a way that posed a threat to someone else or to himself. And because, in fact, it was an incident, the police had to be called. And this was really the first time that the police really got involved with Cody. It was important to alter our plan of care for Cody and to start looking at some of the issues around his self-medicating and also his growing anger and rage that we were seeing in the house that seemed to be mostly directed to the other kids in the house.
Sometimes I just can't handle it, you know. I end up skipping school or staying out past curfew or just sneaking out of the house, you know, just to go see my boys, because I just can't handle what's going on down there. It's just, there's too much pressure.
We began to formulate a plan that would help us to identify some real goal areas for Cody, with the understanding that at some point he would return home, that was the ultimate goal. That seemed to be what he wanted, at least initially that's what he was saying, and it seemed to be what his mums wanted. We also became a little more consistent around expecting him to go on home visits on the weekends, and to reduce the amount of time that he spent in the community, even if he was being supervised. We wanted him to begin to spend more quality time with Janice and Ellie, and to also start working on some of their issues. This change in plan for him resulted in considerably more acting out behavior and definitely more anger from Cody. Janice and Ellie decided that they needed to take a break. Now, they had stayed in contact with him since he was admitted. They would speak with him frequently, daily. And the phone calls had even become more contentious and often ended with him being very sullen or him being upset or accusing them of abandoning him. That, you know, and these were the kinds of comments he was making that we hadn't heard before, which are clearly connected to his feelings about adoption, even though he hasn't been able to go there and articulate them in a real way. They're manifesting clearly in his behavior, and this became incredibly clear, and this is connected to the phone call that I just had. Parents decided that they were going to not have him home for a period of time, and when they delivered that message to him, he became very upset. For the first time, the staff saw some real, much more sad affect with him, almost a franticness. He actually stated, you know, they don't want me anymore. And in some ways, it opened a door, because now the staff feel that maybe they can start to address some of these real issues for Cody. I think it's interesting to note that we recently had a new admission to Acorn House, who is a young man who is also adopted, and these two boys have just gravitated towards each other and spend all of their time together. And we're seeing some very different sides to Cody, which make us quite hopeful about his capacity for empathy, about his ability to perhaps establish some insight, and also to be a more supportive, more positive member of the house. We've seen him actually be quite protective of this other young man. And actually, part of being protective has involved letting the staff be aware of certain situations that are happening in the house, which are really helpful, and also open doors in terms of changing the relationship status of Cody with the other staff if he sees them as being in a position to help. So we're very hopeful about that, and we're monitoring that.
So, you know, there's more stuff I could say. She's always on me about, you know, talking about my feelings and always saying I gotta talk about my adoption, but, you know, screw that crap.